Welcome to the Mexican-American War, or Sectionalism, Part 1. In this presentation, you don't have to take any notes. They're all provided for you. You are welcome to highlight them. That would be a good thing. Additionally, what you also need to do is there will be links, and you're welcome to click those or not. So I'm providing you some optional things to explore. The first thing is sectionalism is trying to explain the different sections. The reason that they've divided into different sections is because of different economies. And really, economics dictates a lot of culture. To be honest, it also dictates a lot of religion. You really get into it. And so the North is going to become more industrial than the South. And so we say that the North is industrial, we say that the South is agricultural. That's kind of an oversimplification. In fact, I would even say that it's wrong the way in which we say it. Most of the North is still devoted not to industry. It's devoted to things such as farming or service jobs. And so the North actually produces more food, farming-wise, than the South does. And meanwhile, what's important here, the reason we talk to you about the industry aspect is that when it comes to the eventual war, the North will have a more modern economy capable of producing the guns and the cannons and all the things that you need for a war scenario. The Southern economy is growing cotton, and they're making so much money off of it that why would they switch to food, and why would they industrialize? They don't have a lot of reason to do that. And so again, as I'm talking about with you, the North has an industrial advantage that the South will never have. Okay, their economy has started to mature in a way that the South has not. And so you can see additionally the railroad lines, the North has a lot more of them. You can see the spider web throughout the North. The South, it's far fewer. This will allow the movement of troops, of goods through the North to aid in war efforts, to aid them economically. The South has less. The North depends upon tariffs. The South does not. The South is actually hurt by them. Okay, but again, it's that industry that the North is developing that becomes crucial in the eventual war. But do keep in mind that they do have essentially more farming in the sense of edible food going on. And so this again gives you a good overview here. Pause it, and I want you to look at population on the left. Okay, farms right here in the middle. Look at iron, manufactured goods. The North has tremendous advantages when it comes to the war. And so you'll see again 92-8 manufactured, 94-6 on iron. It's going to be really hard for the Confederacy to win this war. Okay, and farms, the North even has an advantage there. And so meanwhile, the South, the economy is based on the agricultural production of cash crops, cotton, using the plantation system. And I'm about to show you a series of plantations that pop up within recent movies within the past 10, 20 years. And so transportation, they have some steamboats, but they also have fewer railroads than the North. Okay, they're hurt by tariffs, the same tariffs that benefited the North. This is Oak Alley Plantation in Vacherie, Louisiana. You have a couple different shows that have shown up in Oak Alley to do some filming due to the trees and kind of the look of the plantation. This is Evergreen Plantation in Wallace, Louisiana. And you've seen this in a couple movies perhaps, such as Django Unchained and Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. And so I'll drop some links to some movie trailers with this. Then there is Destrehan Plantation in Destrehan, Louisiana, okay, where they filmed The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Okay, St. Joseph Plantation, also in Vacherie. Okay, it's where they filmed 12 Years a Slave. Again, I'll drop a link. Okay, and Felicity Plantation, also in Vacherie. This is another one. Okay, it was used in a film called The Skeleton Key with Kate Hudson. It's kind of a horror film, kind of a haunted plantation house, which is not uncommon to have plantation houses that have a lot of ghost stories. Now, one of the more famous stories that had plantations from the 90s was one called Forrest Gump. And so Forrest Gump, although it's set in Greenbow, Alabama in the film, they actually did the filming in South Carolina. And so across two plantations, okay, which was the Bluff Plantation and the Plum Hill Plantation. And so this brings us to the first compromise of three that we're going to have to come to an understanding of. And if you really need to kind of wrap your mind around it, please pause it and kind of spend a little bit of time with it. The Missouri Compromise is easy. Missouri's going to come in as a slave state. The problem is that that is going to upset the balance of power between free and slave states in the country. The response is that what they'll do is bring Maine in as well to counterbalance it as a free state. So this will keep the balance of power. Okay, additionally, the Missouri Compromise line that you see here basically means that nothing above that line can be slave, and things beneath that line can be slave. Henry Clay is the guy who creates it. Okay, he is the guy who gets the nickname the Great Compromiser, because he will create the Compromise of 1820, but also the Compromise of 1850. It will outlaw slavery above the 3630 line, okay, and temporarily relieve tensions between the North and the South. Okay, meanwhile, something that's also brewing out in the West, okay, is Texas. And as we know, you have essentially Mexico inviting white settlers in from the United States that we would call Texians, and those Texians brought with them the practice of slavery, but also representative government traditions that go back to the United States and Great Britain. And so those would be sources of tension that would eventually result in the Battle of the Alamo and the other battles, okay, that would ultimately result in Texas independence. Okay, the final battle being April 21st of that same year, okay, Battle of San Jacinto. And the annexation of Texas becomes a huge hot-button issue. So Texas wins its independence, but the United States won't touch it. And it won't touch it for 9 years. There's two problems. If Texas comes into the United States, it'll be a slave state, upsetting the balance of power. Number two, if Texas comes in, it has a border dispute still with Mexico, and the United States will inherit that border dispute. So it's going to take until 1845 for Congress to accept the annexation of Texas. And so you're looking at the De Zavala flag up here at the top left, very famous one. It's in my room. We don't actually know if that flag really existed as we see it there today. There are some historians who think that it actually may have had a rainbow incorporated in it. I'll drop a link where you can explore that story. Okay, over on the right, you're going to see Texas basically in its republic form with that shape. And again, if you want to pause and look, these are the three shapes of Texas from the republic, okay, the annexation, and then ultimately with its statehood. Okay, the border dispute. When the United States brings Texas in as a slave state, it will end up leading to this border dispute, which was perfectly fine with President Polk at the time. President Polk wanted more Western land, manifest destiny. And so Polk will send American troops across what Mexico considered its border, which was the Neches River, right here. He will send American troops across it to what America considered the border, the Rio Grande River. And so essentially he sent American troops, in Mexico's eyes, into their nation, which from a Mexican perspective is an invasion. And so when these troops get shot at, Polk will ask for a declaration of war. Okay? Polk gets to say, hey, we're defending our territory. Mexico gets to say, hey, we were invaded. And so this becomes the basis for the war with Mexico. And so we don't have time to get into all the particulars of that war. But again, it's going to last 2 years. There was a lot going on with Mexico at the time. They weren't well prepared for war. They had a lot of problems at that time in their history. Alta California, this big area up here, it's very lightly populated. Again, it's mostly desert, just like Texas was. And so, again, we have basically troop movements across the American West to get to California itself and secure it. And then we have these naval invasions that ultimately result in the American troops moving up here and capturing Mexico City. And so in 1847, Mexico City captured, here you can see the American troops, okay, will lead to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Okay, and in that treaty, okay, what will happen, the treaty's on the right, is they will finalize what we would call the Mexican Cession. And this is where Mexico will sell 40% of its territory away to the United States. California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. And so not all of these states, but big parts of them quite often. And so this is, again, imagine if Canada invaded the United States and took 40% of the United States. How might we feel about Canada? And so from a Mexican perspective, this is extremely humiliating and embarrassing. But again, the American perspective is also different. So we are looking at the U.S. paying $15 million for this area. Later, the South will push for the purchase of the Gadsden Purchase to complete a southern railroad through this territory. Okay, the only city that's down here in this area of desert is really Tucson. Okay, that's the one that gets talked about the most, Tucson, Arizona. But again, this whole area comes in as a result of the Mexican-American War. California will briefly be a country called the California the Bear Republic, and basically they go from 1848, Mexican-American War over, within a year due to the gold rush of 1849. So many people have flooded into California, and it takes a year, and now California is ready for statehood because it has enough people. And this will create another problem. Okay, what do we do with California? Will it be free or will it be slave? They debate whether they should split California in half. The southern portion of California would be slave, the northern portion would be free. And so what they'll ultimately decide to do is to basically make California free and then give the South something in return. And what they give the South in return is the Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act is a stricter slave act than what we previously had. All citizens must help recover runaway slaves in the North. If they're caught not doing that, it's a $1,000 fine. Adjusted for inflation, that would be more like, $10,000 to $20,000 a day. Judges would get $10 if they ruled someone a slave, but only $5 if they ruled them as free. Well, that incentivizes judges to rule people slaves. This is one of the most obviously unjust laws in American history. But again, the South is getting this law because it gave up California. And so the other element of this is for slaves who escaped. Now, you're not safe if you get to the North. You really need to use that Underground Railroad to go all the way to Canada. And so what follows is the final compromise, the third, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And the big shift with the Kansas-Nebraska Act is that basically in 1854, they're going to begin to allow for these states to exercise popular sovereignty. And so Kansas will get to choose by vote, popular sovereignty, whether it will be free or slave. Okay, and again, spoiler alert, Kansas will ultimately choose to be free. And we'll talk about that in the next part of the sectionalism PowerPoint. And so here you got a quick view of the three compromises, and pause it and take a look at it if you're wanting to brush up on them.